Now, as we all know, January we had the March for Life, and this is the ever-going controversy over the issue of the decree of Roe versus Wade. And, you know, sometimes people say priests should not talk about abortion from the pulpit. And I disagree on two levels. First of all, we should not be afraid to proclaim the truth about the child in the womb being a child, because people might persecute us or get mad at us. That's how we fulfill the Beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of Christ and the gospel. Their reward will be great in heaven. So we may face ridicule. So what? Our job is to proclaim the truth. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. All who are of the truth hear my voice. So there's two parts to the truth. The first part is to counter the greatest lie being propagated on planet Earth right now, which affects millions of people, especially the unborn. And that is the lie that the child in the womb is not a child. Because you just have to look at the coverage that the media does on the Roe versus Wade. They may not report anything at all. If they do, they try to report it's a small crowd, or they mainly report the counter protests, the pro-abortion people. So besides that truth that we are bound to proclaim as being disciples of Christ, and the works of mercy is to convert or admonish the sinner and to instruct those ignorant of the faith, we also proclaim not just the truth about the child in the womb, but we also proclaim the truth about God's love and mercy. Christ from the cross forgave those who were in the process of torturing and murdering him. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I think that part of this issue is a lot of the women that have abortions have been lied to, and they are deceived, because the media does not want to report anything negative about abortion ever. They want you to think it's the greatest thing in the world. Always positive. And it's kind of funny that the media loves to put out impure images, pornographic stuff, and explicit, grotesque things like zombies eating people, and oh, that's just great TV. But you know what scares them to death? Pictures that involve the unborn children during or after abortion. We don't want to look at that. Give me all kinds of impure images and grotesque things, but not that, because when people see it, they go, oh my gosh, that's a child. So we can't have that. Kind of interesting how it works. So as we reflect on it, we reflect that there is forgiveness. Jesus was very easy, relatively speaking, on the woman caught in adultery in the Gospel of John. He said to her, has no one condemned you? Then neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. But who was he roughest on? Who did he really give it to? The clergy. Matthew 23 called them a bunch of snakes and a whole bunch of other things. Just read it. You want to see Jesus going after somebody, you listen to what he says about the clergy. So why is that? Well, I would say that obviously we see what they did to Jesus for proclaiming the truth. And Jesus, of course, as Ed points out, the Beatitude. But when you proclaim the truth, be prepared for the forces of lies and darkness to come after and attack the light and the truth. That's what they did to Jesus. The church and the state united. There's the church, there's the clergy over there. Caiaphas, Ananias condemning Jesus to death. And there's the state, the Romans who crucified him. The church and the state together, crucifying Jesus, who taught in Matthew 25, whatever you do to the least of my brothers, you do unto me. So, in addition to the legislators who are trying to pass all this abortion stuff and reproductive rights, which of course is a ridiculous lie in and of itself, because when you hear the words a woman's reproductive rights. What does that make you think? Well, she's trying to have a baby and someone's trying to stop her. She wants to reproduce and they're taking away that right. Oh, but that's not what it means, is it? Because abortion is a bad word. So we want to attempt to protect abortion with the word reproduction, which is the opposite of it. That's how insidious is the lying propaganda machine. So we want to say then that a woman has a right to do what she wants to with her own body. And of course, we remind people then that a woman's body normally doesn't have two heartbeats. The heartbeat starts at 21 days roughly, right around the time a woman might figure out she's pregnant. A woman's body normally doesn't have 4 eyes, 2 hearts, 2 souls. And so, but the reality is the women who have been lied to and regret their abortion, you know, the media tends to cover up the story. They have many books out. I think one of them is called Silent No More, about the women who had to undergo healing process after discovering the truth about what they were tricked into doing. And I mean, even the doctors, look at Ireland, poor Ireland. I'm part Irish. It's a very sad thing to hear that Ireland has just finally capitulated on abortion. And the interesting thing, though, about the Irish story is that the doctors don't want to do it. They're having trouble finding doctors willing to do the abortions. God bless those good doctors that recognize the truth about the child in the womb and don't listen to the great lie that's spread all over the world. The world's greatest lie, that the child in the womb is not a child, just a blob of tissue. So we understand then that we are called to proclaim the truth. Whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, you do unto me. And what is more least than the child in the womb? So we're the voice of the children of the womb, me and you. And we should not back down from our option. And some of the clergy, unfortunately, are silent. I think if the clergy made a little more noise, it'd be harder for the media to ignore. Instead, we're quiet and we let them take over and take the lead. It's a sad thing. And even the Protestant churches, some of them have capitulated and they support abortion. So I don't know how they can do it when you read in Luke's Gospel, right here, verse 44, 43 I'll start with. The Blessed Mother's visiting the mother of John the Baptist. How does this happen to me? The mother of my Lord should come to me. For the moment the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the infant in my womb leaped for joy. Showing the child in the womb has a soul and a relationship with God. So how these churches, the Protestant churches that claim to follow the Scripture, can read that and say the child in the womb doesn't have a soul, isn't a child, doesn't have a relationship with God. The child in my womb, which is John the Baptist, leaping in the womb of St. Elizabeth, leaped for joy. Not just the baby, for joy. So our job then is to remember to proclaim the truth. 2 parts. The truth that the child in the womb is a child and goes against the lie of the world that says he's not a child, just a blob of tissue. And also the truth that God is merciful and forgives. Jesus is called the Son of David. Who's King David? Forgiven adulterer, forgiven murderer. Psalm 51 is his act of contrition. Very famous psalm. And so, what happened to King David? King David committed adultery with Bathsheba. She got pregnant. We had a crisis pregnancy there. Got to cover my tracks. So he called Uriah the Hittite back from battle to try to get him to go home and sleep with his wife to cover his tracks. Didn't work. Uriah slept on the steps of the king's palace. So then he sent him off into battle with a little death note in his hands. It said to the commander, when the battle is tough, push Uriah the Hittite into the thick of the battle and then pull back and let him be killed. So King David's cruising around the palace thinking he got away with it, and he marries Bathsheba. And then what happens? Nathan the prophet comes. Now, that's one of our roles, folks. When I baptize little babies, I baptize them and I anoint them, and what I say, the role of Christ, priest, prophet, and king. So the priest is someone that offers sacrifice. We're all called to offer sacrifice to God by our prayers and things like that. What is a king? King has a kingdom, a domain. Whatever God has given to us in this world, our resources, our land, our money, whatever, we have a chance to use that for the love of God and neighbor to a certain extent. And what about the role of a prophet? Does that mean we're supposed to foretell the future? No. But the role of the prophet was to confront people that had failed in their service to God. And so Nathan the prophet confronts King David and gives him a parable about this little lamb, and the lamb gets slaughtered, and King David gets so upset, he says, the man that did that should die. And then Nathan gives that famous line, you are the man. You took the wife of Uriah the Hittite, the poor man, as your own, when you were the king and already had access to your own wives. And so then, the king could have turned on Nathan. He could have called in one of his guards and said, chop this guy's head off, I'm done with him. But instead, he listened to the words of Nathan the prophet and was sorry and repented and was forgiven by God and is now in heaven with Uriah the Hittite, whom he murdered, and Bathsheba, with whom he committed adultery. Such is the powerful mercy of God. The Lord on the cross who said, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Dr. Bernard Nathanson, a man on the forefront of abortion, who did probably about 60,000 abortions and was an atheist. Later on, as he studied, he came out with the abortion movies, very famous, The Silent Scream and The Eclipse of Reason, which helped turn so many hearts against abortion. He finally came to belief in God and eventually became a Catholic before he died and was part of the pro-life movement. But he was one of the original initiators supporting the abortion. So people can turn and change. Many women, there's several women who were involved in abortion clinics, some who ran it, who saw eventually and woke up to the truth of what was going on and are now in the pro-life movement fighting against it. And the women who've had abortions, they go through a healing process. We have a thing called Project Rachel, Rachel's Vineyard, where they can go on a retreat. They get to go to confession to the priest. They go through a moment of healing. They ask God's forgiveness. They ask the child's forgiveness. They come up with a name for the child, and then they try to forgive themselves. So the reality is that, it's a very difficult thing. And so, but God forgives. And so the other part of the message, the truth about the child in the womb, is the truth that God forgives, and there is mercy and there is healing. And complete restoration ultimately in Christ, who says in the book Revelation, I will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more sorrow, no more death. For behold, I make all things new. So through God is our greatest hope. But there's a darkness all over the world, the darkness of the lie, that the child in the womb is not a child. And so I would say this to the clergy, bishops and priests, Protestants, Catholic, whatever, who feel that somehow we shouldn't be saying anything and confronting politicians, maybe denying them communion or countering what their lies are in the media. I would say that when we do this, we become complicit by our silence. And somehow we're kind of saying, maybe the child in the womb somehow is less human. Because would we be silent if they had disintegration chambers for children that were 2, 3, 4, and 5 years old? Suppose it was legal to kill your child until they're 5. 4-year-old Johnny had enough of you crying, I'm taking you to the disintegration chamber. You'd say, that's horrible. We would never stand for that. That's murder. Oh yeah? Well, if we won't stand for that one, why do we stand for this one? Because in the eyes of God, there is zero difference between the life of the child in the womb, like John the Baptist, who leaped for joy and has a soul and is created by God, and the child outside of the womb. And, I'm scared to death about my last judgment, but at least I don't think I have to worry about ever supporting abortion. Because you know what? These guys, these politicians that are coming out and pushing this, and the news media that's hiding it, they're going to have to stand there in front of God and all of those children that were murdered, who will now be full-grown men and women, and God's going to say, why did you kill my children that I created? What gave you the right to take the life that I created? You cannot create life. Why do you have the right to destroy innocent life? And so they will have to answer to God and to those children that will at the resurrection be there, full-grown men and women. So we are called to deal with this propaganda. So if you're at work or at school or talking to your friends, someone has a crisis pregnancy, refer them to the Crisis Pregnancy Center. Send them to me. Send them to someone that you know that could be a good counselor if you can't deal with it. At least recommend it. Maybe be able to answer when they say a woman's right to do with her own body. A woman's body doesn't normally have 2 heartbeats or 4 eyes or 4 sets of hands and 4 sets of feet. There's another body there. Anyone with an ounce of common sense can figure that out. Oh, then the little secret weapon of the propaganda lying machine. What about in the case of rape? Ho, got you there. I don't think so. Let's look at it logically and calmly for a moment. So a woman who's been raped, a horrible thing, no doubt. And if she gets pregnant from the rape, which is extremely rare, probably less than 2%, I've had a lot of women come to me in confession in my 27 years of priesthood. I've never heard one that was from a rape, for one thing. And most of them were married women that had the ability to keep their child and raise it. So it was done out of convenience. It's a sad thing. Convenience. You know, the child is inconvenient. Lots of life is inconvenient. So we don't want to turn to abortion as the solution, because in the long run, it's going to backfire. So, what about in the case of rape? All right, so she's been raped. So the argument then is this child in her womb, the product of the rape, is going to remind her of the rape and give her trauma. Perhaps so. But what is the greater trauma? Because if she has the abortion, it's not like she's going to forget she was raped. It's not going to undo the rape. It still happened. She's going to still have to live with it. She's not going to suddenly forget that she was raped because she has an abortion. But now she has a new problem. She's got to deal with the guilt of killing an innocent child who didn't rape her, who did nothing, who's partially from her. That's her son or daughter who didn't do anything to her. So is she now, because she was the victim of an evil rapist, going to then become the villain, turning on this innocent child and taking that child's life when she could have just endured a few more months, given birth to the child and put it up for adoption, or raise it herself, as many of the women who have had children from that kind of a situation have done so. So the result is that the trauma and guilt and psychological damage will be so much worse for a woman who's suffering already from rape to have the abortion than would ever be from her carrying the child to term and giving it up. Because you're adding a new evil, a new trauma on top of the rape. So this nonsense about what about in the case of rape, when you think about it calmly and logically, it doesn't work. So let's try to remember that in the eyes of heaven, there is no difference between the child who's 3 months in the womb and the child who's 3 years out of the womb. No difference in the eyes of God the Father who creates these children. There should be no difference in our eyes, in our heart, in our mind, and we should be the voice of the unborn. God has appointed us to be the voice and protector of children. It falls upon us. So if you're in a conversation somewhere, please don't be afraid to speak out the truth. And if you have a question that they throw at you can't answer, come see me. I'll help you answer it. Go on the many pro-life websites that answer the common arguments that support abortion. Have a pro-life response to the pro-death industry. Let us be the voice of truth, because the greatest lie in the world is constantly being pounded upon us through the media, through the politicians, through the judges, through Hollywood, through the news people. They want that lie to continue, and it's a horrible lie. It's the most evil lie in the world today, going around causing the death of millions and destroying the lives of millions of mothers. So let's be the voice of truth, the truth about the child and the truth about the loving mercy and forgiveness of God, both sides of the truth. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And all who are of the truth hear my voice. Let us then let Jesus speak through us. Jesus, who loves the little children, all the little children of the world, let us be that voice of Christ for life, and maybe we can help save just one little child and a mother.